Winter had arrived in Boston, covering the streets with a thin layer of snow and a crisp air that made people quicken their pace. In the city center, where glass buildings reflected the weak sunlight, the movement was intense, but no one seemed to notice the young woman with a red scarf holding a basket full of handmade candies. Emily Carter, with her gloved hands, moved among the passers-by, offering her sweets with a smile that defied the morning cold. Every word she spoke, every gesture as she extended the basket, carried a silent determination. For Emily, it was just another day of struggle, but also a day full of hope. Life had not been kind to her. Raised in a humble neighborhood, Emily had learned early on that nothing came without effort. Her father, a construction worker, had passed away when she was still a child, leaving her mother, Evelyn, with the task of raising 3 children alone. Years later, Evelyn fell ill, and it became Emily's responsibility to support the family. She dropped out of school and started making candies at home, using a recipe she had learned from her grandmother. During the day, she sold the candies on the city streets. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep food on the table and the bills paid, at least for now. Every coin she earned was carefully saved, with the dream of one day opening her own candy shop, an idea that seemed as distant as the stars. On the other side of the city, Richard Bennett was starting yet another day in his carefully planned routine. At 35, he was the owner of one of the largest technology companies in the country. His name frequently appeared in business magazines, praised as a visionary. Luxury cars, a mansion in an exclusive neighborhood, and a social circle composed of equally successful people were all part of his life. But despite all the glamour, Richard felt empty. He would never admit it out loud, but deep down, there was a feeling of dissatisfaction that had accompanied him for as long as he could remember. It was as if something essential was missing, something that no amount of money could buy. That morning, Richard was on his way to a meeting when he asked his driver to stop in front of a coffee shop he often visited. He needed a coffee to face the hours ahead. Stepping out of the car, he adjusted his overcoat and looked around. That's when he noticed Emily, standing on the sidewalk near the cafe entrance. At first, he barely registered her. She was just another young woman trying to sell something. But for some reason, his gaze lingered on her a few seconds longer. There was something about the way she stood there, braving the cold with determination, that intrigued him. Emily, on the other hand, didn't notice Richard's gaze. She was busy trying to convince an elderly woman to buy some candies, offering them as the perfect gift for her grandchildren. The woman politely declined, but Emily didn't let her smile fade. Moments later, a young mother with 2 small children approached, and Emily seized the opportunity. She knew that in this kind of work, there was no room for discouragement. Meanwhile, Richard entered the coffee shop, but the image of Emily remained in his mind. He placed his order, but his thoughts kept returning to the scene outside. Maybe it was the contrast between the life he had and the life he imagined she lived. Maybe it was just curiosity, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a small spark of interest in something outside his usual bubble. When Richard left the cafe with his coffee in hand, Emily was still there. This time he decided to stop. He approached her, feeling slightly out of place, and observed as she offered her candies to a group of tourists. He noticed the way she smiled, even after several rejections, and how her eyes lit up when someone accepted to buy a package. It was a genuine glow, something he hadn't seen in a long time. Without thinking too much, Richard reached out and bought a package of candies. Emily warmly thanked him but didn't pay much attention. To her, he was just another customer. Richard, however, walked away feeling different. When he later tasted one of the candies, he was overcome by a childhood memory. The sweet, simple flavor transported him back to the days when he visited his grandmother's house, where she would make treats for him and his cousins. There was something nostalgic and comforting about that moment, something he hadn't felt in years. That brief interaction lingered in Richard's mind for the rest of the day. While surrounded by executives and financial charts in his meeting, he kept thinking about the young woman with the red scarf. It wasn't just the taste of the candies or her smile. It was something deeper, something he couldn't quite understand. Emily, unknowingly, had awakened something in Richard, a curiosity he couldn't ignore. On the other hand, Emily also had a day full of reflections. Sales had been average, but enough to ensure another week of food at home. She returned to the small apartment where she lived with her mother and siblings, and began preparing more candies for the next day. As she worked, she thought about the number of people she encountered daily, each with their own stories and challenges. But that day, she couldn't shake the image of the elegant man who had stopped to buy her candies. There was something different about him, something that made it seem as if he carried an invisible weight. The snow continued to fall as night approached. Emily and Richard, each in their own vastly different realities, had no idea how their lives were about to intertwine in an unexpected and transformative way. That night, as Emily took down the decorations from the year-end celebration, she reflected on how much her life had changed in the past few months. She felt a mix of gratitude and curiosity. Who was responsible for so many improvements in her life? Although she didn't know the answer, she felt as if fate was conspiring in her favor, filling her with hope for the future. In the following days, Emily began planning the next step for her small business. Inspired by the increase in sales and the positive response from the community, she decided to experiment with new products, such as homemade chocolates and themed gift packages for special occasions. Lily, always creative, helped with ideas for packaging and labels, while Sam, excited, designed logos for the new items. The family's unity was palpable, and each member contributed in their own way to the success of the business. Richard, on the other hand, felt more conflicted than ever. Although he was happy to see Emily thriving, he knew that his constant interference was becoming a fine line between helping and overstepping. He started questioning his own feelings and intentions. During a meeting at the Philanthropic Foundation, he shared his concerns with Mark. As always, Mark was straightforward. "Richard, maybe it's time for you to stop hiding. Emily deserves to know who's behind all of this." Meanwhile, Clara continued to observe the situation from a distance. Although she had promised not to interfere, her curiosity had not diminished. She began to notice the special connection between Richard and Emily, even without concrete evidence. Determined to explore it discreetly, Clara approached Emily under the pretense of buying some candy. During their conversation, she casually asked about the challenges of selling on the streets and praised the community space where Emily worked. Unaware of Clara's true intentions, Emily responded politely but kept the details vague. Still, Clara felt like she was starting to piece together the puzzle. As Emily expanded her business, a new challenge arose. A major snowstorm hit Boston, making it difficult to access the streets and drastically reducing customer traffic. Emily tried to adapt, but sales plummeted. Worried about her mother's medical expenses and supporting her family, she started working even later, braving the intense cold to sell as much as possible. Upon learning of the situation, Richard decided to act once again. He hired a company to install a small heated awning at Emily's stand, ensuring that she could continue working more comfortably. When Emily saw the setup the next day, she was surprised. She knew someone was looking out for her, but the identity of this benefactor remained a mystery. Still, gratitude filled her heart, and she promised herself that one day she would find out who was behind these generous gestures. During this time, Evelyn's health showed significant improvement. Although she still required constant care, she was able to spend more time with her children, helping with household tasks as much as she could. Emily felt a weight being lifted off her shoulders, giving her more strength to keep pushing forward. Lily and Sam were also more enthusiastic, helping Emily experiment with new business ideas, such as creating a social media page to attract more customers. Richard, in turn, began rethinking his priorities. Inspired by Emily's resilience and the connection he felt with her story, he decided to expand his philanthropic foundation to help small entrepreneurs. He started organizing a community event that would offer free workshops, microloans, and consulting for local vendors. Of course, all of this was done with Emily in mind, though without revealing his personal motivation. During the event's planning, Richard had an idea: to invite Emily to participate as one of the speakers. He wanted her to share her story of perseverance with other small business owners. He knew this could be a big step for her, but also a challenge. To make it happen, he asked Mark to approach Emily in a neutral way, as if it were a random invitation from the foundation. When Mark reached out to Emily, she was surprised but honored by the invitation. Although nervous about the idea of speaking in public, she accepted, seeing the opportunity as a way to grow her business and inspire others. Lily and Sam were thrilled and immediately started helping Emily prepare her presentation. They researched data, created charts, and even rehearsed with her at home. The family's unity was evident, and everyone was excited about the new opportunity. On the day of the event, the venue was filled with small business owners, curious attendees, and local journalists. Emily stepped onto the stage with visible nervousness, but as she began sharing her story, her confidence grew. She spoke about the hardships she had faced, the strength she had found in her family, and the gratitude she felt for the acts of kindness she had received along the way. Her sincerity and humility moved the audience, who gave her a standing ovation at the end of her speech. Richard, watching discreetly from the back of the room, felt immense pride. Emily was shining, and he knew that choosing to help her had been the right decision. Clara, also present at the event, finally connected all the dots. She realized that Richard was behind the support Emily had been receiving. Determined to confront him, she waited for him after the event. However, before Clara could say anything, Richard took the initiative. "Clara, I know what you're thinking, and it's true. I've been helping Emily because I believe in her potential and the strength of her story. But this isn't something I want to make public. I hope you'll respect my decision." Clara, though surprised by Richard's honesty, agreed to keep his secret, but made it clear she would continue to keep an eye on him. After the event, Emily received countless compliments and partnership invitations. She felt that her life was beginning to change in a definitive way. Despite all the progress, there was still one question that unsettled her. Who was the guardian angel silently looking after her? Emily knew that sooner or later, she would uncover the truth. In the days that followed, Richard continued to watch from a distance, but now with a sense of closure. He knew Emily was on the right path, and that his direct interference was no longer necessary. Still, he couldn't shake the desire to get to know her better and, perhaps, become a more open part of her life. As the snow began to melt and spring approached, Emily and Richard's story seemed to be just beginning. Both had learned important lessons about resilience, generosity, and human connections, and although the future was still uncertain, one thing was clear: their lives would never be the same again. With the arrival of spring, Boston's landscape began to change, reflecting the hope and new beginnings that Richard and Emily were experiencing in their lives. Emily, now with her business fully established and her customer base growing, was starting to become a small local icon. People passing by her corner would often stop not just to buy candy, but to exchange a few words, share a smile, or simply absorb the warmth she radiated. However, with progress came new challenges. One of the street vendors who had been displaced by Richard's revitalization project began causing trouble. Upset over the preference given to Emily, he spread rumors among other vendors, suggesting that she was benefiting from a powerful patron. Although Emily was unaware of the source of these rumors, they began to affect how some people perceived her. One afternoon, as Emily returned home, she found an anonymous note pinned to her door, filled with harsh words accusing her of using connections to monopolize the space. Though she tried not to let it affect her, the words echoed in her mind for days. To make matters worse, the former group of vendors started appearing near her corner, provoking customers and trying to intimidate her. Richard, noticing the situation, felt an urgency to protect Emily without overstepping her autonomy. He organized a meeting with the local community association, offering financial and strategic support to create a rotation system for vendors. The proposal was accepted and brought more harmony to the area, but Emily still faced small acts of hostility. Despite this, she persevered, showing a resilience that Richard admired more and more. Meanwhile, Evelyn's health stabilized, but new challenges arose with Lily and Sam's education. Lily, always responsible, dreamed of attending a good high school, but the costs were a significant barrier. Emily did everything she could to save money, while Richard, in secret, decided to launch a scholarship program through his foundation, aimed at talented young students from struggling families. Lily was among the first selected, receiving an emotional letter that brought tears to Emily's eyes. Though she didn't know where the help had come from, she felt deeply grateful. During this time, Emily began investing in diversifying her products. Inspired by Margaret and other loyal customers, she started creating new candies with exotic flavors, incorporating recipes her mother had taught her. These new treats quickly became popular, and Emily started considering expanding her sales beyond the street corner. At the same time, Richard saw this as an opportunity to help her grow without directly interfering. He connected Mark with a small local business owner who was looking for partners to sell handmade goods in his store. When Emily was approached with the proposal to sell her sweets in a local shop, she was surprised, but saw it as a chance for something bigger. Working tirelessly to meet demand, she began balancing her street sales with production for the new supplier. The increased workload brought exhaustion, but also a deep sense of accomplishment. Parallel to this, the relationship between Richard and Clara reached a critical point. Clara finally confronted Richard about his feelings for Emily, suggesting that his concern for her was interfering with his corporate responsibilities. After reflecting, Richard acknowledged that his corporate life was becoming secondary to the impact Emily and her story had on him. He decided to restructure his priorities, delegating more responsibilities within the company and dedicating more time to philanthropic projects. On a spring night, Richard made an important decision. He visited the corner where Emily worked, but this time not as a casual customer. With a sincerity he hadn't shown before, Richard revealed part of his past to Emily, explaining that he had grown up in humble circumstances and that despite all his success, he felt like he had lost something along the way. Emily listened attentively, surprised by the vulnerable side Richard was sharing. Though he didn't reveal how much he had already done for her, the moment marked a significant step forward in their connection. The following days brought new wins for both of them. Encouraged by the partnership with the local store, Emily began planning to open a small kiosk in a community market, something that had seemed impossible just months ago. Meanwhile, Richard decided to turn his revitalization project into a replicable model, expanding it to other areas of the city. Emily's professional growth also brought new responsibilities. She began hiring help to keep up with the production of her sweets, including Ben, the young musician, who proved to be a dedicated and creative worker. Ben also helped create a social media campaign to promote Emily's products, further increasing her popularity. As summer approached, Emily was invited to participate in a local culinary event, where she would have the opportunity to showcase her sweets to a larger audience. She accepted with enthusiasm, working day and night to prepare. On the day of the event, her booth was filled with curious visitors, including Richard, who watched her with pride from afar. As Emily stood out, Clara, still determined to understand the depth of Richard and Emily's connection, attended the event. Seeing Emily interact with the crowd, she finally realized that Emily's influence on Richard wasn't calculated, but rather a genuine inspiration he had found in her strength and authenticity. Though reluctant, Clara decided to step back, realizing that forcing the situation wouldn't bring any benefits. With the event's success, Emily began to be noticed by local investors interested in helping her expand even further. However, she decided to move forward cautiously, staying true to her values and focusing on sustainable growth. Watching this new phase closely, Richard felt a sense of fulfillment he had never experienced in his corporate achievements. Despite her recent success, Emily began to feel the weight of her new responsibilities. Balancing taking care of her mother, supporting her siblings, and expanding her small business became exhausting. One night, while preparing a new batch of sweets for the store, Emily collapsed from exhaustion in the kitchen. Lily found her and, worried, insisted that she rest. But Emily, determined, refused to stop, feeling that she couldn't let her family down. This incident didn't go unnoticed by Richard. He realized that despite all the improvements he had brought to Emily's life, she still carried an immense burden. He started questioning whether his interventions were truly helping or just adding more pressure. To complicate matters, Clara, who had decided to step back, reappeared with a corporate proposal that, though legitimate, put Richard in a delicate position. The idea was to use Emily's story as part of a campaign to promote a new corporate social responsibility initiative. Richard immediately refused, stating that Emily deserved to grow on her own merit, without her life being exploited. However, Clara planted a seed of doubt in his mind. Was he really helping Emily, or was he shaping her journey in a self-serving way? Meanwhile, Emily faced a new challenge with Ben. The young musician, who had become an important ally, revealed that he was struggling to pay his bills. Despite her kindness, Emily didn't have the resources to offer him a higher salary. Feeling guilty, she started looking for other ways to help him, even if it meant cutting costs elsewhere. Ben's struggles brought forth a new conflict. How much should Emily sacrifice for those around her? Evelyn, now more lucid, began noticing Emily's exhaustion and suggested that she prioritize her own happiness. But for Emily, putting others first was almost instinctive. At the same time, Emily's unease about her mysterious guardian angel continued to grow. One night, while going over some invoices, she found an old receipt mentioning Richard's philanthropic foundation. Connecting the dots, she began to suspect that he was behind the changes in her life. However, Emily didn't know how to confront him, or if she even wanted to. In a moment of introspection, Emily wrote a letter to Richard, thanking him for everything he had done. Even without directly confirming her suspicions, she left it on her sweet stand, hoping he would find it. When Richard read the letter, he was overwhelmed with mixed emotions. He knew his intervention had been discovered, but he also felt the weight of the possibility that Emily might feel betrayed or manipulated. Meanwhile, Clara, still determined to prove her point, started probing Emily directly. Pretending to be a curious customer, Clara asked about the story behind Emily's success. During their conversation, Clara realized that Emily had more strength than she had initially thought, and for the first time, she felt a hint of empathy for the young woman. However, this didn't stop her from continuing her investigation. Clara found documents proving Richard's connection to the corner where Emily sold her sweets. Determined to expose this, she planned a public meeting at the community market, during which she intended to reveal Richard's involvement and question his intentions. On the day of the meeting, the market was bustling, and Emily was busy tending to customers. Clara took the stage and began speaking about philanthropy and social responsibility, directing her gaze straight at Richard, who was also present. At the peak of her speech, Clara revealed Richard's acquisition of the property and suggested that he had been manipulating the situation for his own benefit. The revelation was a shock to Emily, who immediately felt a wave of confusion and betrayal. Richard tried to explain, but words failed him in front of the crowd. In tears, Emily left the market, feeling like everything she had worked for now seemed like a carefully orchestrated play. In the days that followed, Emily avoided Richard. Despite his numerous attempts to explain himself, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had lost her autonomy. Even knowing that Richard's intentions had been good, she needed time to process everything. Meanwhile, Richard began deeply reflecting on his actions. He realized that while his intentions had been genuine, he hadn't given Emily the space she needed to grow on her own. He decided to take a step back, allowing her to regain full control of her life. After weeks of silence, Emily was surprised by a letter from Richard, in which he explained his motivations and expressed his regret for not being more transparent. He also made it clear that he believed in her ability to achieve great things, with or without his help. The letter became a catalyst for Emily, who realized that her independence and strength had not been diminished by Richard's actions. Determined to move forward, Emily decided to accept an invitation to showcase her sweets at a state event. On the day of the event, as she was setting up her booth, Richard appeared, but this time, as a mere spectator. He didn't try to intervene or take the spotlight, but his gaze conveyed a deep and silent respect. When Emily finally took the stage to receive an award for the social impact of her business, she looked out into the crowd and found Richard. With a sincere smile, she thanked everyone who had supported her journey, acknowledging that while she had received help, it was her determination that had brought her there. As Emily's recognition in the city grew, her story began to be mentioned in small local newspaper articles, and her sweet stand became a symbol of resilience and community spirit. Despite this, she continued to work tirelessly, maintaining the same focus and humility that had always defined her. Her family also grew stronger. Evelyn, now recovered, dedicated her time to helping with the preparation of the sweets, while Lily and Sam showed creativity and enthusiasm, contributing in ways that ranged from designing packaging to creating small strategies to attract new customers. Richard, watching Emily's transformation from a distance, felt a mix of pride and restlessness. He knew the time had come to decide what his place in her life would be. His support so far had been careful, without imposition, but he wanted something more. Even so, he deeply respected Emily's independence and knew he couldn't interfere without being invited. As he dealt with these thoughts, he continued his philanthropic work, inspired by the impact a single person could have on an entire community. At the same time, the corner where Emily had started her journey became a gathering place for other small vendors and local artists. Richard saw an opportunity to expand the positive impact and, discreetly, financed the creation of a structured community space where entrepreneurs could work with dignity and security. Emily was invited to be a mentor for new vendors, something she initially accepted with hesitation, but soon became one of her greatest achievements. As the months passed, the community foundation created by Emily began to take shape. She dedicated herself to offering training, microloans, and logistical support to street vendors facing similar challenges to those she had overcome. Her passion for helping others was evident, and her personal story lent credibility to her leadership. Emily, who had once seen her life limited to providing for her family's daily needs, now envisioned a future where she could positively impact many lives. The connection between Richard and Emily, though subtle, continued to deepen. He admired her not just for her determination, but also for the way she inspired others without ever placing herself above them. For Emily, Richard's presence on the periphery of her life was a comforting mystery. She knew he had contributed in some way, but didn't fully understand the extent of his support. There was a mutual sense of respect and gratitude, even though both avoided directly expressing their feelings. As winter approached, new challenges arose. A series of storms made it difficult for Emily and other vendors at the community market. However, Richard, anticipating the difficulties, had already taken measures to ensure the space was protected against the harsh weather. He arranged for the installation of covers, portable heaters, and even provided materials to help vendors package their products more efficiently. Once again, these actions were carried out anonymously, reinforcing the collaborative environment without taking the spotlight away from Emily. Meanwhile, Emily began attracting the attention of local investors interested in turning her small operation into something bigger. Initially, she hesitated, fearing she would lose control over what she had built with so much effort. However, after conversations with friends and advisors from the community market, she realized that expanding her reach could mean more jobs and opportunities for others. She accepted a partnership with a local store chain that agreed to sell her products, while maintaining their artisanal and community identity. With this expansion, Emily began balancing her responsibilities as an entrepreneur, mentor, and head of the family. Evelyn became her greatest supporter, helping to organize production logistics, while Lily and Sam continued to bring energy and creativity to the business. The growth of the family was directly connected to the growth of the enterprise, reinforcing Emily's purpose of staying true to her roots even in the face of success. Richard, on the other hand, was going through a period of introspection. He realized that his relationship with Emily had transcended the initial admiration. He saw in her a strength that inspired him to rethink his own choices and priorities. So, he decided to take a bolder step, using his influence to further expand the reach of the community project, bringing in new sponsors and resources for the foundation. However, this time, he chose to appear publicly as a supporter, marking a change in his previously reserved approach. When Richard finally met with Emily to discuss plans for expanding the community space, the dynamic between them changed. Their relationship, once marked by anonymous gestures and casual encounters, now had a clearer purpose. Emily acknowledged the impact Richard had on her journey, but also made it clear that her independence remained fundamental. Richard respected this stance, admiring her strength and determination even more. During a grand event held to celebrate the first anniversary of the Community Foundation, the space was decorated with simple yet meaningful lights and adornments. Vendors, artists, and community members gathered to share stories, experiences, and achievements. Emily was honored as the driving force behind the initiative, receiving warm and emotional applause. It was then that Richard, overwhelmed by the emotion of the moment, decided it was time to take a definitive step. After his speech, in which he praised the transformation Emily had brought to his life and so many others, he stepped off the stage and in front of everyone declared his feelings. He didn't just admire her, he loved her. Emily, surprised but deeply moved, smiled before responding with a gaze filled with emotion. That night, amidst the lights and celebration, they shared their first kiss in front of the community that meant so much to both of them. From that moment on, Richard and Emily's partnership solidified, both in their work and personal lives. They began working together more openly, combining resources and ideas to expand the foundation's impact while building a relationship based on love, trust, and mutual respect. In the years that followed, the community market grew, becoming a model replicated in other cities. The foundation continued to support small entrepreneurs, and Emily became a respected figure in the solidarity economy movement. Richard, in turn, found a new purpose in his life, dedicating himself more and more to philanthropic initiatives inspired by his experience with Emily. However, the greatest celebration was yet to come. In an intimate ceremony, surrounded by friends, family, and community members, Emily and Richard exchanged vows, sealing a love that was born from collaboration and mutual respect. In the end, Emily and Richard's journey left a legacy that transcended their individual stories. Together, they proved that even coming from such different worlds, it was possible to build something meaningful when values like empathy, collaboration, and courage were put into practice. And so, on a street corner that once represented struggle and survival, a new vision of hope and transformation was born, not only for the community, but also for a love that blossomed amidst change.